major developments, we hope, over the weekend and in coming days in Gaza as well. Let's talk about some of that. Israel has released footage claiming to show the existence of 55 metres of tunnels close to the Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza. Israel's military also released footage showing Hamas taking hostages seized in Israel into the hospital, which they have repeatedly claimed the terror group uses as a military command base. Joining me to talk about this is Rear Admiral Dr Chris Parry at CBE. He's a former Royal Navy commander. Good afternoon to you, Chris.
Good afternoon.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I'd like to talk to you also about some of the threats we're seeing back here in the UK as well. But let's talk about these events over the weekend. We saw the discovery of these tunnels, 10 metres deep, 55 metres long, a spiral staircase going down to these tunnels, booby traps, the like. The footage being put out by the Israeli Defence Forces, a press conference last night, also footage, it is claimed, I'm not in a position to verify, you're probably not in a position to verify, footage put out claiming to be from October the 7th of Hamas fighters armed. You can see people with weaponry going into what appears to be a hospital corridor with two people believed to be two of the hostages, foreign nationals, seized in Israel, taken back to Gaza into this hospital. We're putting some of that footage on the screen right now to be treated after being injured, of course, injured by Hamas fighters. First of all, how much can we trust what Israel is saying about this footage?
I think from what I've seen, it's been very difficult to disprove much of what Israel has released. I think with any information warfare campaign, you've got to bear in mind that you're getting selective release from any organisation. Even in this country, we do the same. We don't tell you everything because it's not actually tactically or strategically useful. And we have to bear in mind that every real campaign is accompanied by a virtual campaign simply because you have to win the war and be seen to win it as well. But as far as I can see, there's very little as a critical sort of analyst I can fault in what Israel has released. On the other hand, of course, Hamas is constantly lying, and you have to apply the test that start on the basis that they're lying and then sort of try and prove which bits are truthful. Yeah. I have to say I'm struggling.
The fog of war, it does affect all sides. It really does, doesn't it? But we know there have been claims from the Israeli Defence Forces for a long time that the Al-Shifa hospital, the biggest hospital in Gaza, is used as a command and control base by Hamas. This is something, by the way, which was in a report some years ago by Amnesty. I'm not entirely sure they're controlled by the Israeli Defence Forces. It's been, this TV series Founder. This was, routinely mentioned. This was just considered to be common knowledge. We know that Hamas has boasted themselves about using civilian structures to hide their bases. So it's not really a massive stretch. All the criticism of the Israeli forces we've seen from not just the left in this country, but around the world of, you shouldn't be going in, sending your fighters into this hospital because this is, we've got babies, not having incubators, people dying. We've got people who are hiding out there, treating it effectively as like a refugee camp to all intents and purposes. All that criticism is based on the idea that this is a protected civilian structure. But you'll know the rules of war better than those of us who are armchair generals. If it is being used in this way by Hamas, and if there have been, their fighters routinely use it, if they took the hostages there, not the nearest hospital to the Gaza border, no reason for them to take them all the way to Al-Shifa, if they do have this tunnel network underneath, then it is a legitimate target, is it not?
Well, I think everybody knows that Gaza is probably the most heavily fortified and militarized city on the planet, not only above ground, but also what is known as the Gaza Metro underneath it. I think the important thing, Julius, recognise is that underground is the new stealth environment. We've seen it in Ukraine, we're seeing it now in Gaza, and that is something we're going to have to cope with. What is remarkable at the moment is how well the Israelis are coping in an urban environment. This classically takes a lot of lives in actually moving through urban structures like this, which are all booby-trapped, they're all fortified, as you say. Every aspect of public and private infrastructure in Gaza has been fortified. And the casualties on the Israeli side are pretty low. Now, as far as the law of armed conflict and the Geneva Convention are concerned, you're not allowed to fortify protected sites like hospitals, schools, and all these other things. That puts Hamas completely on the wrong side of war crimes. And as far as I can see, Israel is doing its level best to try and minimize casualties in trying to neutralize what are, in fact, militarized sites. And I'm afraid to say that any blame for casualties that occur on these protected sites must lie with Hamas, who are ruthlessly and cynically exploiting their own population in order to shield themselves.
Well, indeed. And again, those voting against, or not voting for a ceasefire in Parliament of the week, and those not calling for a ceasefire right now being accused, well, we're responsible for all these children dying in Gaza. The reality is it's Hamas who are stopping them leaving. It's Hamas that brought this on them. Can I ask you about the chances of these hostages coming out, though? We're told maybe 140, 150, there's numbers of hostages, so 240 odd hostages that are still being held. Some are military, IDF, vast majority are civilians. We're told that possibly up to 50 are children and women. Again, some of those women, by the way, women were served with the IDF, so presumably these are civilians. But there seems to be a lot of hope coming out of even places like Qatar. We've been trying to manage these negotiations between Hamas and the Israeli government of hostages being released on the Hamas side, and in return, a larger number of prisoners taken by IDF over recent years, women and children again, being released by them. This is how these things have happened in the past, isn't it? That hostages are only ever released in return for Israel releasing their prisoners.
Julia, everything changed on the 7th of October. I don't think Israel's in the emotional or intellectual mood to actually say the rules are the same as before. The sort of tariff, if you think about it, used to be 1 Israeli for 6,000 Palestinians. I don't think that's going to apply anymore. You can't trust Hamas. Whatever they say about how many hostages they hold, what they intend to do, it'll all be used as a tactic in keeping the Israelis at bay. And I'm afraid to say, having listened to some of the parents and relatives of the hostages, they're saying, look, we don't believe anything until we see them on the ground, safe and sound, back in Israel.
But there's an awful lot of pressure on the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, isn't there, to get these hostages home. There is still an awful lot of criticism of the fact that Israeli Defense Forces didn't spot the plotting on this October the 7th massacre, didn't spot the breaking through in so many different spots on the fence and get to aid people sooner, preventing those hostages being taken, preventing some of the brutality and the deaths and the torture and the rape, all the other horrific events on that day. There is still a lot of questions being asked by many Israeli civilians about the failure of the Israeli government on that day.
Yeah, of course. And the Israel government is in the same position the US government was the week after Pearl Harbor. There'll be a lot of questions at the tactical and strategic level as to what failed. But the fact of life is, when you have hostages in the hands of your opponent, you're going to have to conduct the war according to what your objectives are in the war. And I'm afraid to say the hostages are part of that war. Yeah. And what Israel will be considering is, what is the relationship between the hostage release and the survival of this state, which is currently under attack, not just by Hamas, but also threats from 6 other different fronts, including Hezbollah in the north.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for your time and your expertise, Rear Admiral Dr Chris Parry, CBA, former Royal Navy Commander.